Book 1, Chapter 7 of The Lancashire Witches. This recording is in the public domain. Reading by Andy Minter. The Lancashire Witches, a Romance of Pendle Forest, by William Harrison Ainsworth. Book 1, Alison Device. Chapter 7 The Ruined Conventual Church. Beneath a wild cherry tree, planted by chance in the Abbey gardens, and of such remarkable size that it almost rivalled the elms and lime trees surrounding it, and when in bloom resembled an enormous garland, stood two young maidens, both of rare beauty, though in totally different styles, the one being fair-haired and blue-eyed, with a snowy skin tinged with delicate bloom, like that of roses seen through milk, to borrow a simile from old Anacreon, while the other far eclipsed her in the brilliancy of her complexion, the dark splendour of her eyes, and the luxuriance of her jetty tresses, which, unbound and knotted with ribands, flowed down almost to the ground. In age there was little disparity between them, though perhaps the dark-haired girl might be a year nearer 20 than the other, and somewhat more of seriousness, though not much, sat upon her lovely countenance than on the other's laughing features. Different were they too in degree, and here social position was infinitely in favour of the fairer girl, but no one would have judged it so, if not previously acquainted with their history. Indeed, it was rather the one having the least title to be proud, if any one has such a title, who now seemed to look up to her companion with mingled admiration and regard, the latter being enthralled at the moment by the rich notes of a thrush poured from a neighbouring lime tree. Pleasant was the garden where the two girls stood, shaded by great trees, laid out in exquisite parterres with knots and figures, quaint flower beds, shorn trees and hedges, covered alleys and arbours, terraces and mounds, in the taste of the time, and above all an admirably kept bowling green. It was bounded on the one hand by the ruined chapter house and vestry of the old monastic structure, and on the other by the stately pile of buildings formerly making part of the abbot's lodging, in which the long gallery was situated, some of its windows looking upon the bowling green, and then kept in excellent condition, but now roofless and desolate. Behind them, on the right, half hidden by trees, lay the desecrated and despoiled conventual church, reared at such cost and with so much magnificence by 13 abbots, the great work having been commenced, as heretofore stated, by Robert de Topcliffe in 1330, and only completed in all its details by John Paslew. This splendid structure, surpassing, according to Whitaker, many cathedrals in extent, was now abandoned to the slow ravages of decay. Would it had never encountered worse enemy! But some half century later, the hand of man was called in to accelerate its destruction, and it was then almost entirely razed to the ground. At the period in question, though partially unroofed and with some of the walls destroyed, it was still beautiful and picturesque, more picturesque, indeed, than in the days of its pride and splendour. The tower, with its lofty crocketed spire, was still standing, though the latter was cracked and tottering, and the jackdaws roosted within its windows and belfry. Two ranges of broken columns told of the bygone glories of the aisles, and the beautiful side chapels, having escaped injury better than other parts of the fabric, remained in tolerable preservation. But the choir and high altar were stripped of all their rich carving and ornaments, and the rain descended through the open rood loft upon the now grass-grown graves of the abbots in the presbytery. Here and there the ramified mullions still retained their wealth of painted glass, and the grand eastern window shone gorgeously as of yore. All else was neglect and ruin. Briars and turf usurped the place of the marble pavement. Many of the pillars were festooned with ivy, and in some places the shattered walls were covered with creepers, and trees had taken root in the crevices of the masonry. Beautiful at all times were these magnificent ruins, but never so beautiful as when seen by the witching light of the moon, the hour, according to the best authority, when all ruins should be viewed, when the long lines of broken pillars, the mouldering arches, and the still glowing panes over the altar had a magical effect. In front of the maidens stood a square tower, part of the defences of the religious establishment erected by Abbot Lindley in the reign of Edward III., but disused and decaying. It was sustained by high and richly groined arches, crossing the swift mill race and facing the river. A path led through the ruined chapter house to the spacious cloister quadrangle, once used as a cemetery for the monks, but now converted into a kitchen garden, its broad area being planted out, and fruit trees trained against its hoary walls. Little of the old refectory was left, except the dilapidated stairs once conducting to the gallery, where the brethren were wont to take their meals, but the inner wall still served to enclose the garden on that side. Of the dormitory, formerly constituting the eastern angle of the cloisters, the shell was still left, and it was used partly as a grange, partly as a shed for cattle, the farmyard and tenements lying on this side. Thus it will be seen that the garden and grounds filling up the ruins of Whalley Abbey afforded abundant points of picturesque attraction, all of which, with the exception of the ruined conventual church, had been visited by the two girls. They had tracked the labyrinth of passages, scaled the broken staircases, crept into the roofless and neglected chambers, peered timorously into the black and yawning vaults, and now, having finished their investigations, had paused for a while, previous to extending their ramble to the church, beneath the wild cherry tree, to listen to the warbling of the birds. "You should hear the nightingales at Middleton, Alizon," observed Dorothy Assheton, breaking silence. "They sing even more exquisitely than yon thrush. You must come and see them. I should like to show you the old house and gardens, though they are very different from these, and we have no ancient monastic ruins to ornament them. Still they are very beautiful, and as I find you are fond of flowers, I will show you some I have reared myself, for I am something of a gardener, Alizon. Promise you will come." "I wish I dared promise it," replied Alizon. "And why not, then?" cried Dorothy. "What should prevent you? Do you know, Alizon, what I should like to do better than all? You are so amiable and so good, so very pretty. Nay, don't blush. There is no one by to hear me. You are so charming altogether, I should like you to come and live with me. You shall be my handmaiden, if you will." "I should desire nothing better, sweet young lady," replied Alizon. "But " "But what?" cried Dorothy. "You have only your own consent to obtain." "Alas! I have," replied Alizon. "How can that be?" cried Dorothy, with a disappointed look. "It is not likely your mother will stand in the way of your advancement, and you have not, I suppose, any other tie. Nay, forgive me if I appear too inquisitive. My curiosity only proceeds from the interest I take in you." "I know it, I feel it, dear kind young lady," replied Alizon, with the colour again mounting her cheeks. "I have no tie in the world except my family, but I am persuaded my mother will never allow me to quit her, however great the advantage might be to me." "Well, though sorry, I am scarcely surprised at it," said Dorothy. "She must love you too dearly to part with you." "I wish I could think so," sighed Alizon. "Proud of me in some sort, though with little reason, she may be, but love me most assuredly she does not. Nay, more, I am persuaded that she would be glad to be freed from my presence, which is an evident restraint and annoyance to her, were it not for some motive stronger than natural affection that binds her to me." "Now, in good sooth, you amaze me, Alizon," cried Dorothy. "What possible motive can it be, if not of affection?" "Of interest, I think," replied Alizon. "I speak to you without reserve, dear young lady, for the sympathy you have shown me deserves and demands confidence on my part, and there are none with whom I can freely converse, so that every emotion has been locked up in my own bosom. My mother fancies I shall one day be of use to her, and therefore keeps me with her. Hints to this effect she has thrown out when indulging in the uncontrollable fits of passion to which she is liable. And yet I have no just reason to complain, for though she has shown me little maternal tenderness, and repelled all exhibition of affection on my part, she has treated me very differently from her other children, and with much greater consideration. I can make slight boast of education, but the best the village could afford has been given me, and I have derived much religious culture from good Dr. Ormerod." The kind ladies of the vicarage proposed, as you have done, that I